I'm an architect. I moved to Nantucket in 1990 with my wife and one-year-old daughter. I currently am the chairman of the Nantucket Historic District Commission. I've been on the board for 7 years. I'm working through the last 2 years of my third term. The HDC is charged with ensuring that the existing historic fabric remain intact and that any new fabric, new buildings, be done in accordance with sort of the architectural traditions that were established here during the whaling days. There is a role for any member of the public on the HDC. The HDC is charged with regulating the design of buildings to be in context with the historic buildings on Nantucket. Sometimes people misconstrue our mission as being limiting growth, things like that. We've even had people come in and say, like, well, the pool will make too much noise. So if you're really serious about being on the HEC, you should recognize that your job in being on the board is not to limit growth. It's to regulate architectural growth so that it is in keeping with the historic fabric of Nantucket. That is our charter. Anyone can be on the board. I think a diversity of opinions is a good thing to have. The HDC fit in intimately with my day job because doing work on Nantucket, as an architect doing work on Nantucket, I would appear weekly before the board. For many, many years, I sat on the other side of the table. Now, for the last 7 years, I've sat on the side, the board that regulates everything, and we review the applications that I used to submit. My motivation for being on the HDC was a little bit of a lightning bolt realization. We were sort of shaking the trees trying to find that next member, and I looked in the mirror and I realized that that person was me, that I now had the time to be able to spend, so I went for it. Now, the interesting thing about the HEC in particular is that most of the voting public on Nantucket doesn't really have much contact with the HEC, and they only hear about the HEC peripherally. So, it pays to have a popular name on Nantucket. If you're a local person who's well known, that certainly helps you at the ballot box. With the HEC, it helps for the fact that there's so much time involved in being a member that I think it keeps a lot of people away. And honestly, I feel like a lot of people don't want to undergo the pressure of having to actively campaign. The amount of prep work involved in being on the HDC, I think, varies from member to member. Some of the members on the board right now, myself included, are members of the design community. So, as I described it in my own personal experience, I had years and years of being on the other side of the table presenting. So by the time I actually got to the HEC and was sitting on the board, I kind of knew what was expected of applicants and what you could do stylistically and what you could not do stylistically. For anyone who is not a member of the design community, I would say that you could start out as an associate member, which is the select board appoints the associate members. They don't sit on every single application. They sit on, if somebody has a conflict, like if I need to recuse, somebody else will sit in, an associate member will sit in. So being an associate member is kind of a nice way, if you have no prior experience with the HCC, of getting your feet wet, because you're not in there 100%. You're sort of in there maybe 25 or 30% because you're only sitting in on occasional applications. So the learning curve is not all that great. In addition to the hearings, we also do what are called site viewings, where if the visibility of a project is in question, we will drive out on a weekend. We're given a list by the administration that says view 117 Eel Point Road and view 89 Quidnet Road. So we go out and we look at the sites so that by the time we convene as a board on Tuesday afternoon, we're familiar with the site already. Building with Nantucket in mind is our handbook. I would consider it a living document, and it is guidelines. It is by intention, not prescriptive. Architecture is very site-specific. It has a lot to do with context. It has to context in the sense of the landscape, but also context in the sense of whether it's in town, out of town, at the edge of town. So the guidelines are good, and I think anyone can read them and walk away with a fairly good understanding of Nantucket architecture. But then we can all walk out of our doors right here on Nantucket, and within an hour, if you're completely foreign to Nantucket and you've just arrived and you walk around town and you drive around outside of town for a few hours, you get a really good sense of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Anyone who has an interest in the visual landscape, which is, of course, what the HCC is all about, it's easy to pick up. Anyone can be on the board. I think a diversity of opinions is a good thing to have.